Okay, so yeah, I wasn't really ready to stop streaming, and I did want to say something in response to the very compelling and beautiful uh, reading that Jacob offered. And first, I'll just put I know probably no one really has the time to join me here, but just in case, I will put the link in the chat. And if no one joins me, it will become the insanity that I threatened earlier of me just reading my notes to myself. So what, there's no chat? Hold on. Okay, yeah, there it's there in the comments. You know what he was reading, it reminded me a bit about what Aquinas meant when I believe he said that God doesn't exist, which was a really interesting thing to say because but I think it makes sense because when we on the road of logic where terms have meaning, ordinarily if I use a word like exist, it's expected I should mean something by it. What exists means is that it's experienceable under some conditions, because for something to be experienceable under no conditions is what it means for a thing to not exist. And without non-existence having some meaning separate from, the meaning of the word existence, it doesn't seem like I can mean anything when I'm using the word existence, at least insofar as we're in the realm of logic and duality and distinction. But God is sort of, in other words, like a rhinoceros is experienceable under some conditions, and a unicorn is not experienceable under any conditions, at least not any conditions in the space-time world, so far as we know, notwithstanding the question of whether one can find a black swan, or like logically prove the impossibility of finding a black swan. And so God is also experienceable under no conditions, sort of like what I said about the Tao. Among the objects, among the 10,000 things, one will not find, in addition to the 9,999 others, the thing that is the Tao. It's experienceable under no conditions. And so that's what he meant when he said it didn't exist. That reminds me of sort of like some of the difficult things that I've said, like, when I was talking about a particular individual and I said this individual is God and God is this individual, but I don't mean so in such a way where this person is alone God and you are not, but rather they are God at that point where all things are one, which is the only point where anything really is. So it's like a difficulty, or an opacity or a darkness, but I thought it's not really so different from what Aquinas meant when he said that that God doesn't exist. It's a thing you can say about God because he's infinite. And what is infinite is not constrained to not be identifiable or identified with everything, and is not constrained to thereafter transcend them or go beyond them, any particular thing with which it's identified. But any distinction is presupposing, at least again, as long as we're in the realm of logic at all, some deeper ground on which identity or unity obtains. If we're beyond logic, then one would say, essentially, that God both is and is not identified with the thing. But if one is trying to absolutely rule out the impossibility of ever identifying God with one of his creatures, it doesn't seem like something one can meaningfully do with a term which, at least as far as one's predicable logic went, was meant to be infinite. Yes, it's the after party, and you're more than welcome to come in and jump in, because otherwise I'm just going to start doing this madness. Or not. Maybe I'll talk about some other stuff that was about, like, sort of the hard stuff, but about non-judgment and sort of the practical application of all this, that a person is in a sense never wrong. A person is a bears description as God insofar as they're a whole world that's closed in unto themselves. One cannot judge them wrong unless one stands in the place that they're standing. And if one stands in the place that they're standing, one is not seeing anything other than what they see. Okay, Sherry. And so it's God's apprehension of God's self in them, in a similar way as we say when it's God's spirit in us that moves us to seek God. We speak of that as a grace from God. Is the Holy Spirit in us compelled us to go seeking after God instead of the mundane things or what have you. And the simple God is not anything other than His grace, and so the simple God is not anything other than God's apprehension of God's self in a particular person, which means the infinite God is in some paradoxical ways identified with each consciousness exclusively, which is really similar to what Nicholas of Cusa meant when he said that God sees each person as if they're the only person that exists, so that, as a first approximation, we can say this reality, which looks like an ensemble of perspectives or consciousnesses that are all closed unto themselves, is God's seeing of each person as the only person who exists. So trying to find the sense in which someone is always right is a deep part of non-judgment. If something was not right or discoverable as correct, and I mean ultimately, and in the most profound or meaningful or important sense, correct about a person's judgment, then it's like in principle there's no possibility of redeeming it or forgiving it. So that redemption or forgiveness requires an effort to understand, which presupposes that this person is always more originally, presuppositionally, like they are in the beginning. They are in the image of God, from the beginning of the operation, from before the beginning of the operation until after the end, so to speak. The image of God that is ineffable is something which always sort of persists, continues to show itself in each person. And God continues to see it, continues to see them as in the image, and worth, so to speak, worth trying to understand. And there's a point where explanations always run out. Explanations only go so far. A new question has to be asked, and in a certain sense the answers to the questions don't exist until the questions are asked. But it's not so much in the answers or the explanations that the justification exists as in the gaze of the one who is looking for explanations, because they see you as good. And it's like, I know you, I know who you are. You see God in everything that you do. Therefore, whatever reasons you had must have been good reasons. So it's like the person is justifying the reasons rather than vice versa. But anyway, that was a whole long ramble, and even that was not as opaque as it could have gotten. But I have a real person here, fortunately, so now the conversation can go back to normal-ish things.
I'm just super impressed by anyone's ability to just speak to a camera. I think it's probably easier for external processors to do the solo live streaming. I always find it more helpful to actually speak to someone. And also the reason I joined is I find I can grasp you easier when I have to pay attention to you. Otherwise I'll get distracted and go on different tabs. So you carry on doing what you're doing. If I've got any input or questions, I'll ask.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because I had the notes here, which were like the genesis of the whole thing. And my notes are really only, I did cover most of them actually, so it kind of gets rid of the need
All right.
to
Okay.
read through it. I mean, I can, and you'll just see the strange ways in which I think, um, uh, but I actually did manage to successfully cover most of it in this talk. So actually, how about I actually try to practice what I preach and just like ask you about you, man? What's going on with you? Or like,
This is going to be a case of passing the ball. What's going on with you? What's going on with you? But I'm good. Thank you for asking. I think. Sorry, comment distraction. So my instinct when I
can
first
I say
clicked
this
on
real
the
quick, Phlebas? I
go for
will
it.
talk to you, but these kinds of comments, to interact with comments that are somewhat oppositional, I find I can't do it. If I'm going to talk with someone who's giving pushback, it has to be in person in real time. Otherwise, this mode of interaction, I can't really successfully do it. And that's not
And
it's not your fault for doing that. It's my fault for not being able to do that. But it's just that there's a very limited degree to which I can interact with pushback in the comments.
no, it's both.
Yeah.
It's both your faults. I think it's. I do agree with you. It's difficult to. Okay, let me ask instead of assuming. Is your the reason you react to that way to Philip's comment, is that because you feel like the question is missing the point in which you're trying to articulate, and it's diverging away from it?
No, it's not. It's just I feel like it's something I can't win because I'll be swinging at these targets that aren't even what he meant me to hit.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you were speaking in person, it would be easier to be able to find each other quicker rather than just swinging wildly.
Exactly. Because otherwise, I'm just shooting in the dark the whole time.
Yeah. What was I? I think that actually links to what I was saying, which was my when I first clicked on the live stream, my initial reaction was just to I listened for a while and I was struggling to grasp. Again, I didn't want to go back and start 8 minutes ago and fast forward, but I was trying to grasp what you were getting at. And the first reaction was, where is he trying to find like, is he trying to put God in a box? That was my for just the first
Sure.
reaction. Like, is it trying to find a way to grasp the ineffable or the infinite in a way that can be articulate? So that was, and I was like, okay, I've listened to you long enough, and I trust the spirit in which you engage. You think that I can see you're genuinely wrestling, like the sincerity in which you're wrestling with these ideas is what made me keep watching, even though I couldn't quite grasp it. But now that it's just us, I think I can ask some questions to better understand what it is that you're trying to grasp at.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been trying to do isn't really so different from what theologians have mostly done. Like Nicholas of Cusa is one, and he's one from whom, in fact, I get a lot of inspiration. He talked about God as the not other, which makes sense if one is trying to understand God as like the infinite as such, whoever's infinite in every respect. Because certainly if it was not infinite, if it was defined or limited, one would not really think of it as God. And he talked about like this statue that was like in the like monastery or wherever he was, that whoever was looking at it, it looked like the statue was looking at you. So even if two people were on the opposite sides of a room, they were both looking at the statue, they both had the sense that the statue was looking at them and them alone. And that caused him to meditate on the gaze of God. And it's really like this, like when Christ says that whoever sees himself as first will be last, there is one way that can be taken, which is that God himself sees that person as last, who had the temerity or the audacity to see himself as first. And the other way is that whoever sees himself as first will be last, because in the kingdom, each one is first. But if you have a light of the eye, an ideal according to which some others don't measure up, um, if you have a light of the eye,
When you,
such
sorry, let me just when you say two things I want to go back to, but the first one is when you say in the kingdom, everyone is first. Like flesh that out a little bit more for me.
in other words, God is seeing each person as his favorite, as the best. God is
And
not
that,
rank ordering people so that he actually likes Teo more than Cal and likes Cal more than Bill Gates.
and okay, yeah. I'm gonna let that sit in my right brain for a bit and go back
Yeah.
to the other thing was,
Well, if
and I
God
think
were ordering people in such a way like that, he would be like a finite being, and it wouldn't really answer our deep sense of who and what God is.
yeah.
And so that if I'm seeing my
Let me
success,
sorry. I'm gonna keep
no, it's
just
fine.
keep slowing you down because I've got a lot of catching up to do. Like you've thought deeply about all of these ideas, and I'm just trying to find my way. Okay. The statue, the image of the statue, um, that wherever you're standing, you feel like is looking at you.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place in which we could to start because I can grasp onto that. That image is powerful, and I think it articulates what you're trying to say about. So the way my understanding of what I think you're gesturing at using the statue would be in order to be as loving as we're called to be, we would have to see ourselves. Oh, we would have to posture ourselves in the way the statue is postured, such that we'll see our reflection back. Is that what you're gesturing at? Is like okay, so if the statue.
No, sorry. The statue was a thing that I think it was a real thing that he observed, that everyone had the sense that it was looking at them and them alone, which makes you wonder,
Okay.
how is that possible? Because if it's looking at him, he can't be looking at the other person. And that caused him to just meditate on the sort of the gaze of God, who's infinite, because God's not limited to only be in one place in space. So theoretically, even though the statue isn't really looking at everyone, God is. But what does that mean? And
Okay,
so,
so that God is looking at everyone, and everyone. That thing that links back to the image of everyone being God's number one is from where you're standing. You feel the gaze of God as looking slowly at you. So that can be an image of being like God's favorite. It's like God's eyes is on you, and everyone feels that gaze and feels like they're God's favorite. Okay,
I would say even more, everyone is that gaze, because if the vision of his book is called De Visione Dei, which means the vision of God. But it raises the question. I once read this whole book called The Experience of God, hoping that it would, when I first started believing in God, I read a book called The Experience of God by David Bentley Hart, thinking it would tell me about what it's like to be God, i.e. the experience of God, i.e. God's own experience. And it wasn't that. It was all about our experience of God. But if God is, if he's absolutely beyond all logical binaries and definitions, then it's not going to be that it's either his vision of you or your vision of him. Those two things are going to be the same thing. Like Meister Eckhart said, the eye through which you behold God is the eye through which he beholds you. So it's more the beatific vision, what Catholics call the beatific vision, is, I would say, it has to be happening for God to be God. That's how it looks from the standpoint of logic. It has to be happening all the time. It is your own existence.
Okay.
And that does get
Let me give you what I've got so far, because I don't think you're saying anything that I disagree with. I can see why the thing you're gesturing at is so. It feels both obvious and blasphemous at the same time.
Sure. No, that's right. Like, it sounds blasphemous for Aquinas to say that God doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said at the start of this stream, what we mean by exist is experienceable under some conditions, because what it means to not exist is for it to be experienceable under no conditions. And if to not exist didn't mean that, there wouldn't be any difference between my saying something exists and didn't exist. So for exist to mean anything, it has to mean it's experienceable under some conditions. But God as such is not experienceable under any conditions. unless he's experiencing in like literally every single experience, like as that whole experience.
Okay, that's the jump. Okay, the jump from the jump from the understanding of the gaze of God to we also are you saying we also have that gaze, or we're called to that gaze to experience reality the way God sees it?
I think in the limit, ultimately, if you're trying to, if you're always trying to go deeper into what it is and what it means, you have to understand that you are that gaze, and that gaze is you. But you know, it's kind of like the present moment. Like if I'm trying to understand like the present moment as what it is, as this very like present stretch of time that's distinguished from the past or the future, and like how long is now? It's, you know, it's like calling the next now. Oh, too late. It's like now is very seemingly very quick.
Like grasping the wind.
And I'm talking about that now that was so fast that it blew by me. Is that now? No, it's not, because now is now, kind of thing. And so as the present, like as such, it cannot be measured or durated. It can only be measured as what it's not, namely the past. To measure it is to almost spatialize something that should really, it's like time is this funny thing, because to understand that we spatialize it, but like the time of time, which in the limit is God / eternity / God. It's you know, it's this very temporal flowy thing that's not appropriately spatialized, and it's not really ever grasped. So that's what I mean. Like one can make an effort to get deeply into the present, because I could say, well, the present was this just now, and it was 2 seconds, and that's a kind of approximation. But it's actually not. If I'm really trying to be serious about the effort, you know, to get at what was the present, that's not going to do it all. I have to try again. I have to try to be more accurate. So I'm talking about God. God is a big man in the sky. Well, okay, that's because it's better than saying he's my TV. He's a little bit more transcendent and powerful if I say he's a big man in the sky. Is that enough? No, it's not. In fact, it's infinitely not enough. So, okay, let me try again. God is, you know, this kind of ground of being, but he's absolutely transcendent. And it's like, that's pretty good. But the thing is, if he's absolutely transcendent, it's making me wonder, he's totally other to me at all times. It's making me wonder, what's the deeper ground of being beneath me and that radically transcendent and always other ground of being? Hence, Nicholas of Cusa was talking about God as the non-aliud, the not other. And so, in other words, that move makes sense too. And what one is discussing is the infinite. And if what one means by God is the infinite, because if whatever candidate thing for God one proposed was not infinite, if it was finite, one would never say it was God. So, you know, we are looking, when we're looking for God, we're looking for the infinite. We're looking for the infinite, we're looking for God, kind of thing. Sorry if that's not really helpful.
No. That I followed all of that completely, and I think what comes to mind is this, like, I'm understanding you better, which is contextualized a lot of the previous stream, which probably isn't helpful to bring up again, but in an attempt to stay in the moment best I can, I think the appropriate posture in this moment would be to ask the arc in which got you up to there, the understanding of God, the way in which your understanding of God has been developed that got you to this point.
I was a Hare Krishna until I was 16 years old. Then I became an atheist in the sort of very reductive Richard Dawkins tier, that sort of where you ignorantly make a metaphysical move and say there's nothing beyond the material world, you know, which is itself a metaphysical move. It's not really within the scope of science to make a move or a pronouncement like that. You know, scientific methods wouldn't tell you if there was, in fact, nothing to find or learn beyond, you know, the world of, you know, empirical science. But at the same time, it's not really like I was saying that. It was more like I was saying if there was something beyond this, one would have to prove it. And so far, I've seen no proof. And then for 12 years, I was an atheist. And the kind of atheist that I was, I knew Aquinas's 5 ways and things like that. And you can prove some God of the philosophers. But I was like, until one can prove that God cares about you, it's functionally indistinguishable from atheism, because the ultimate reality that doesn't care about you might as well be the naturalistic, might as well correspond to the naturalistic nature of some nothingness that truly gave rise to the Big Bang, and the space-time continuum, that somehow it could magically just do that. So it's not really what we normally think of when we think of nothingness. It wasn't no thing as such. And so it's kind of godlike already, but the point is it doesn't care about you. And so
relational.
Yeah. So in other words, for me, the point was, don't just go proving some uncaused cause. No one cares. I could say that whatever caused the Big Bang is the uncaused cause. So what? The question is, does it care about you? Because if it's not caring about you, there's no afterlife, kind of deal. So
isn't the act of creation or show of care, even from this nothingness?
Well, it is if we presuppose that it is. But if one asks why it should be seen necessarily as that, then one has
a good question. Yeah,
extra work to do, because it could be that it just spontaneously created something for no reason that we can understand. Like if I'm way smarter than a chicken, then notice I don't really care about what chickens do, and maybe whatever I do is for no reason that the chicken can ever really understand. But I never at any point do I care about the chicken, and in fact I might kill and eat the chicken. So what if it's the same way between me and this hypothetically super intelligent ultimate reality? But at the same time, it's like I never knew if we should regard the ultimate reality as being intelligent, which in its way seems to presuppose finitude. Because whatever I say it's intelligent, it's always like a finite mind or consciousness. No. Whatever I say, if whatever I use, what does intelligent mean? Well, whatever I use that word of, it's all, if I try to give examples to someone who asks what it means, I'm always using it of minds that are defined and finite anyway. But the no thing that gave rise to the Big Bang, it's not really clearly that. And so there was a lot of stuff that had to be sort of answered. And for me, the big way, my big, for me, the person who really helped me to grasp theism was Chris Langan, the autodidact philosopher who's super politically incorrect, and everybody who finds him on the internet is convinced that he's saying nothing of value because he's even more unintelligible than I am. And so they assume therefore he can't have anything that's worth saying, because if he could, then I would have understood it. But I don't understand it, therefore he's just making it up. And so, but no, he was the one who really opened my eyes, who awakened me from my dogmatic slumbers, so to speak, like Kant said of David Hume.
Do you remember what it was, what argument or what it was about watching him that changed your posture towards?
Yeah, for sure,
of reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting to what I said earlier about what it means for something to exist is for it to be experienceable under some conditions. If I mean
wait, just say that again for me one more time.
What it means for something to exist is that it should be experienceable under some conditions.
What it means for something to exist is that it should be experienceable under some conditions.
Yes. Because what I mean for something to not exist is that it's experienceable under no conditions. And if I don't mean something by not exist, then I don't mean anything by exist. And if I say that this
tree in the forest thing.
Yeah. And if I say that this thing exists, despite being experienceable under no conditions, I at that point sound like I'm saying nothing that anyone actually means when they use exist. Like, yeah, this thing exists, but you can't see, hear, smell, touch, or taste it under any conditions. No one ever could or ever would. This is called a global, and it definitely exists. And globals cannot be seen, touched, or tasted under any conditions ever. And they never in the past and never in the future will they ever be. They will never, occupy some remote corner of the galaxy such that if someone went there, they would be able to see one, hear one, touch one, taste one, measure one in any measurable way. But they still exist. It's just that you can't ever experience them.
I think
I'm just saying nothing at that point.
I think the under no condition is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the frame, the agent's arena frame comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the condition is not so much the arena, but the transjective relationship between the agent and the arena.
Mm-hmm. Well, because interestingly, the thing that does seem to satisfy all those conditions is God.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a kind of, well, that's what I was talking about earlier about logically leading to its transcendence. There's a way that distinctions presupposes that absolute unity of both X and not X that cannot be experienced in the form of any finite discriminable object. But I didn't know that yet at that point. That Langen helped me to see as well with this concept of, he calls it unbound telesis, but it's not totally without an analog or precedent in the thought of other people. Like Pierre Simon de Laplace said, sir, why do you criticize my ideas? The ideas I concede are not new, they're stolen, but it's the arrangement that is new. So same thing I would say with Chris Langen. Now he helped me to see that really what existence means is, existence in the ordinary sense. It means that it's experienceable under some conditions. And therefore that for there to be experience is necessarily presupposing an experiencer, so that the idea of a reality that was completely independent of perception, that does not require perception in order to exist, is strictly meaningless. So he helped me to understand the necessary interdependency of reality and a perceiver of that reality. And from there on, I was able to see, well, there's got to be, like in Berkeley, in terms almost like George Berkeley, like there is a perceiver out there such that he can never go out of existence, because for his going out of existence would have to be an event, and for it to be a real event, it would have to be an event in the perception of some a more ultimate perceiver. But that more ultimate perceiver is what all men speak of as God, and what we originally meant when we were talking about this, this most ultimate perceiver that we're hypothetically imagining. Well, what if he could go out of existence? Same thing, what if he could come into existence? His coming into existence would be an event that would require the already established existence of some more original perceiver like that. And then from there also there were considerations regarding why it is that God must why he in fact loves us. Although at this point, see, it's hard to talk about these ideas for an extended period. I'm willing to give it a try, but when I get into that does get harder. I'm willing to give it a try.
Okay.
But like Langen was right to note that the ultimate reality cannot be so absolutely and radically transcendent as all that, because it would just be to ask, what's the still more ultimate ground of being that's underpinning the distinction between ordinary old existence and then the radically transcendent ground of being. And so there's a way that God is always identifiable with his universe of all real things. And for Langen, God is like the self-containing set of all sets. He is this reflexive principle that in some sense is always succeeding in jumping over his own shadow. Reality has to take the form of something that eternally evades the force of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And it is like a self-containing set of all sets. And he had his own different mereology about how you can do that. So he had two senses of containment, so that a thing can contain its power set in one sense of containment and be contained by its power set in another sense of containment, which is different from conventional set theory, which doesn't allow for there to be a set of all sets. because it has to simultaneously contain and be contained by its power set, which it can't do. And if you have like a totally spatial logic, like the circle that is containing all the other circles can't also contain itself. It only has one medium of containment in which to operate. So Langen was seeing all kinds of stuff like this, and he's a pantheist, and so he sees the universe as a mind, and God is the answer that we give in response to the question of whose mind. And so the universe, you can understand it as one consciousness to which we all relate in a similar sense as the neurons in your brain do to the consciousness that supervenes on the activity of your brain. And so if you're asking, can my brain as a whole have an experience that's good for it as a whole, but bad for most or all of the individual neurons on which it supervenes? It can't. Logically, it can't. And so from there, I could begin to see that if we looked at the universe in this way, or God in this way, sort of, so to speak, as the universe, as all real things, not necessarily just as all physical things, then I came to see that the utility function, his what's good for him, is necessarily interdefined with the utility function of all the creatures that are in God, all the creatures that he created, who you can see as the contents of his consciousness. And again, still, this isn't the most accurate. This is not the most accurate way of seeing it, but I'm talking about through successive approximations through Langen. I came to, and I'm not saying this is how Langen thinks. I'm saying this is how I came to think after I started reading Langen. Mm-hmm. Then I started, but see, it gets even deeper than that, because the ultimate reality is unity. He is love. What it means to love, like I said at the start of the stream, is to see someone as in the image of the infinite, or what's desirable. And he is the identity that is so infinite that he cannot but see everyone and everything as being in his image. Even that's not totally like, but there's something there. Like if he didn't see you as being in his image, that would reveal a finitude in his image. I'm safer putting it like that. And that would be a problem. And then I realized, wow, it's not just atheists who don't believe in God. It's apparently like pretty much all the theists who don't believe in God either, because they believe stupid stuff. Like, yeah, God's going to just damn, more than half the population for literally zero reason. Like in predestination, there's nothing that you do that is, that you... How to put it? God doesn't ever choose you or not choose you because of anything that you did. And so like I realize there's Christians who believe in that, and then I realize there's Christians who don't believe in that. But when you really look at all of what they believe and try to logically interrelate it, they're just operating on some conception of predestination, whether they realize it or not. And so anyway, but that's kind of how I got into theism. That's the arc. That's the so
no. Thank you. That's been super helpful. I think.
So from 16 to 28, I was an atheist for 2 years. From 28 to 30, I was a semi-theist. I started believing existentially, but I didn't see it intellectually. I didn't believe it intellectually. And Langen was who broke the door down for me at age 30. And there were also a couple psychedelic experiences, but they did not convince me of God's existence, even though weirdly, like how I explained it is the mushroom told me that God exists, but I don't believe that. I don't believe it had an intentional consciousness. I believe that I was just on drugs. But I had
Why?
Well,
doesn't that experience justify a condition? Oh yeah, I can see.
And so, but after that, what really changed and what remained true, maybe it's even something I need to be delivered from, Christians would say. Maybe they're right, but I had this great hunger to understand the ultimate reality. And so I went to the strongest form of theism that I had ever seen or encountered, which I remembered looking at Langen as a young man at almost 20 years old. And I saw, well, this guy is an idealist. And I know idealism is wrong because I have this version of not idealism that I think makes sense. And he hasn't done enough to prove, why that doesn't work. And then when I was 20, so that was like from 20 to 30, I came back in 10 years and I looked at it. I looked at Langen again and I realized I was totally wrong. I then understood the thing that I explained about how to exist in the ordinary sense means it's experienceable under some conditions, which means that it's implying that there is an experiencer a priori. And that truthfully, that metaphysical idealism was never actually refuted. It just became unfashionable. You can kind of go through the history of philosophical development and pinpoint the moment at which it became unfashionable. There were basically like two, I want to say essays, not exactly, but two basically arguments that were put forward by George Moore, who didn't really offer anything in the way of reasoning at all. And there was Bertrand Russell, who did, but and I can't even really remember exactly what he said now, but I remember when I looked at that after having reread Langan, I was like, yeah, he's not seeing what essentially Langan sees. There's just an embedded contradiction or a mistake in his premises. So anyway, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. I think that the next question that wells up for me is, I'm curious about how you've just very well detailed the up of your understanding of the infinite of God. I'm curious as how the way you think of God tracks with the way you think of people.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've had the thought that if you're treating people in sort of a rude way or a diminishing or dehumanizing way, it's showing that there's a very noticeable sort of limit on what your highest conception of the good is. It's when people don't have a very great conception of the good that they do desperate things. So people will take drugs or they will sleep around because they have an emptiness or a pain inside and they're trying to alleviate it with something very short term. So the highest good of which they can conceive is something just very short term. And a similar way, if I diminish or dehumanize Teo, that it's, I will use the language of the light of the eye. The highest value by which I orient myself and in terms of which my world is disclosed to me, it's not really all that high because it sees nothing. It's very defined and very limited because it doesn't see anything in Teo that corresponds to it. And whereas if I'm a very, what we call a humane or wise or integrated person, then I see something of myself in all people, right? And then I'm going to treat people, as I would want to be treated myself. And so, one can see from the way that one treats others, it's automatically revealing something about the way one conceptualizes God, you might say, but you can have an atheist and they have a conception of God, the ultimate reality and the highest good. They have that. They don't view it as an intentional agent. Not that you arguably ever even really should, but it works as a first approximation. But atheist has a highest good, and what their highest good is revealed, at least in part by the way that they treat people.
How did you treat people as an atheist, and how do you treat people now with your understanding of God? Or what's the difference? Does that track with what you're saying?
It does. I had a lot of evil thoughts, and I was able to contemplate suicide for very long periods of time. As you can see, I never successfully did that. But if you had me in an actual interaction with people, I couldn't bring myself to treat them in a rude or dehumanizing way. I feel like if I had died at that time, and there were many times when I could have died, in a similar way as in this near-death experience that I often think of, the experience of the near-death experience of George Ritchie, who dies as a young man in World War II, and he meets Jesus, and he says, "Jesus, I'm only 18. I can't die yet." Because he encountered Jesus, and Jesus asked him, "What have you done with your life to show me?" And he answered, "I can't have died. I'm only 18." And Jesus said, "Death can come at any age. Now, what have you done with your life to show me?" And in a similar way, I think that if I had died as an atheist, as the young man that I was, I would have said, Jesus, if I had known that you were real, that this was real, if you would have just done something to show me, I would have studied you. I would have learned about you. I would have given my life to understanding the real nature of the reality that I inhabit. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Well, he would have said, you did learn something about me. You did know something about me. Now tell me, what did you learn? What did you learn from all these experiences? Because whatever I had learned was reflected in whatever modicum of humanity I did manage to treat people with. Because I picked up C.S. Lewis and I didn't believe any of it. And I'm not saying like I was so great. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal.
No. You're being honest. I understand.
And the truth is, I had this thought the other day. I always hear people saying that when they came from atheism to belief, as an atheist, I was suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. Truly, when I look back, I cannot really find any sincere desire for there to have not been a God. Not really. I wanted there to be a God, but I didn't want that to be the reason I believed in God. And so the thing is, I had some kind of ideals. I wasn't not believing because I just wanted some excuse to party. I had some measure of idealism, which is not to say that I was righteous. Like I picked up C.S. Lewis and I thought, like, this really is awesome. Like, especially as I had gotten older and I went through some formative experiences. I died to myself when I had a very severe years-long episode of mental illness called depersonalization, derealization. It could have been viewed clinically as the prodromal phase of schizophrenia, where I just didn't have any feelings at all and I completely isolated myself from everyone. And God revealed to me that I was numb, and I didn't call him God. I didn't call that God, but I knew that whatever that thing was that met me came from the place where love is. It didn't make sense in my categories at the time, but I had an experience that was both inner and outer. It was not a voice. It was not anything perceptible, but it was a moment of conviction where I felt through the ice that was in my heart and I felt everything that was excruciating. And I was told I had no self apart from all the relationships that I was turning my back on. And because I had believed as an atheist in the technological singularity, and I had majored in speech pathology, which has become my profession, but I had majored in that because I knew I already knew how to transcribe. I knew I already knew all that material. It was to keep my GPA high so I could go to law school, so I could make as much money as possible so that I could live forever in the technological singularity. And I thought I had to embody the philosophy of rational egoism because that was the only thing that I could, that made sense to me. And I thought in my heart, I have to learn how to, if it ever becomes zero sum, I have to, man, I can't even tell you how demonic and twisted my thinking had become. But basically, I had a moment that shattered all that, and I realized, oh wow, so if I could live forever as something like not human or more than human, I won't even choose that, because as a human, I can't even intelligibly desire to be something other than what I essentially am. And what I essentially am is defined on all these relationships that I'm in some zero sum way conceiving myself as apart from or different from. And but even that, see, for a time I knew that, and out of sheer perversity and pride and evil, I still, because I hated existence and I hated being, I still, even though I knew the irrationality of what I was doing, I persisted in it. And then God met me in some way that I can't really describe. But after that, I realized I had to, after that, I realized, like, even if I had the chance of becoming immortal, I would sacrifice it. And that in this life, I had to optimize for being human. And that means dying. So I voluntarily accepted my own mortality on some level. I stopped seeking that. So I became a speech therapist instead of a lawyer, which is a really weird way to become a speech therapist. So but I went through something like that, and then C.S. Lewis started making sense, because like, okay, we can be totally mortal, but the point is, what he's doing is something like finding the trigonometric function, like a sine function, like, and you can understand that in terms of like the right angle, where it has its genesis as a concept, or you can sort of extend it beyond the original parameters. Like, it's no longer the ratio of like the sides of this triangle, but now it's like this eternal like sine function that transcends the original parameters that it had, like of a triangle, something like that. I realized that there's a certain way that all the stuff that C.S. Lewis is talking about makes sense if we lived forever. We don't live forever, but I should try to live now as if I was, in some sense, living forever. Like, I realize there's a kind of eternity that is like, it's not the eternity of infinite, indefinite temporal extension forever in this life, but instead it's like, if I died in the next moment, I would be fine. I would be satisfied, because everything that I was supposed to do as a human being, I did. So I was learning to live like more toward that ideal. I had some light, even though I didn't believe in God.
Thank you so much. This has been very helpful, because I can track the ways in which the patterns have been revealing themselves to you, and now you're leveling up. I love the realization of integration, that of the need to pay attention to your relationships, to put it that way.
Yeah, because at that time I read an extremely powerful book that remains extremely influential in my thinking. I don't read very much, so it's not many books I can say that about, but Mindsight by Daniel Siegel. And that was a tremendous book. It's like the best book about Jesus that doesn't mention Jesus. I almost want to say it's like the best book about Jesus, period. Because it's about a force of integration that operates in reality, and which is basically, it's convertible with attention. It is the mindfulness that, in a sense, negates itself. It takes a step back from whatever impulse wants to overtake one's consciousness or mindfulness in the moment, and suffers the death of not giving in to that impulse, and then seeing, what am I after that? My consciousness like sinks like a stone until it finds some sort of bottom. When I'm still and I let all the noise and stuff play out, then what? And all the sediment and the dust clears in the puddle. What bottom do I see through the clear water, kind of thing? And it was all about like being integrated on different levels of your being, and then eventually sort of you find your identity not in just you, but in all the people around you, and in an ever expanding web of relationships. So that it's similar to what Jim Cathcart in a TED Talk said, when he said that as we get older, we become a bigger vehicle or vessel for the rest of life to operate through us. There's something that in here that's inescapable. Well, I mean, it's all there ultimately in the metaphorical understanding, but it's not ultimately a metaphor of Christ, of the body of Christ, of which Christ is the head. So that Christ is the body and a member of the body. It's relational, but he's also the reality underneath. As I said, distinctions presupposing unity, but yeah, Mindsight by Dan Siegel was just this crazy great book that it was what laid the groundwork for the Holy Spirit to meet me in the way that I was met.
Oh, that's so good. And part of why I wanted this interaction was to sort of seek understanding. And I'm always amazed by the ways in which God just tracks down people.
Wow. Yeah, and the thing is, if we ever shy away from our testimonies, are like these things that we didn't make. We have a little bit of leeway in how we choose to tell it, but fundamentally, And if we want, we can hide it or falsify it or run like Jonah. But our testimonies are things about ourselves that we didn't author. It's God's handiwork. And there's almost, in a way, an obligation to share your testimony because you didn't create it, but God created it. And for what purpose, you can't claim to know. And so, it may be that he has a purpose for you to share your testimony to someone, because certainly I never thought I would ever believe in God. It made no sense to the idea of becoming Christian, not having been raised Christian, made as much sense to me as becoming Muslim. It was totally foreign, totally foreign. So I never thought I would believe ever. He certainly, I still have this where it's increasingly, this is passing, but it used to be for a long time, like I would wake up, forget that God existed, rediscover that God existed, or even like every moment would be like that.
Oh, Cal, you have no idea. Okay, so I've had this since I was probably 5 years old. Was the first time I can remember just remembering that God exists and being overwhelmed by it, and almost there are two experiences in that maps onto what we're talking about. One is just the greatness and terrifyingness of creation. This period that every once in a while would just dawn on me, and I've since learned that all I can do in that moment is just say thank you. And the other way which experience that maps onto this is realizing that I'm playing a role in the play of reality.
You have to be very integrated to be able, or you have to be a certain degree of integrated to even think that. I was younger, I didn't see like things like that, and I still now struggle to because of all the health conditions that I live with. But yeah, it's showing that it's here's the thing, like how I see it is like on the day of judgment, you're going to face the test of universalizability, you might say, which is like you're going to see your actions in your life not from the perspective that you lived it through, which is your own and your own only, but from the standpoint of all those whom your actions affected. And then as them, you will pass judgment on you. And that's what it means to be the rule that does or does not survive its own judgment. And to the extent that you're integrated like that, you will pass the test of universalizability. So it's good. It's good to be integrated. But I almost think I've written this, and this is getting into stuff that maybe I really truly no longer have the energy to intelligibly discuss. But the test of universalizability leads to this categorical non-judgment. Am I losing that? Hopefully I'm not losing.
No. Just
the test, the process of.
Can you say that sentence again?
The test of universalizability ultimately leads to a categorical like non-judgment, just like a.
All right, let me just pounce on. I'm going to just pounce on just that statement. Quick. Okay, so this morning I'm part of an estuary, Manchester. I've got so many estuaries I'm a part of, but the Manchester estuary one, the group chat started going off, and ultimately what we were wrestling with was the utility of categorization. And there's clear, I mean, most of them are non-Christian, and there were the point that got me into it was something like they said Judaism is responsible for the polarity in Christianity because of the categorization that takes place in Genesis 1. And I was like, oh, no, you've got it all wrong. It's not just categorization, it's unity, and it's all of that. And I think that maps onto that sentence.
That
Which
makes me think of what.
I need to write it down. Give me a second. Let me find a pen. I need to write
Sure.
that sentence down.
Well, Aristotle said that being is not a genus. And I think what he meant by that is something similar to what I mean when I say that if the ground of being is something that's conceptually opposed to just ordinary being, it's presupposing a more ultimate and more meta ground of being underneath both. I think that's what Aristotle meant when he said being is not a genus, like being is almost like not a category. Um, but what I was going to say was, see, the
test of
test
universalism.
universalizability. Like, yeah,
universalizability. Yeah.
UNIPERSABILITY.
Yeah.
Um,
Cheers.
it leads to non-judgment in the same way that logical distinction leads to like contradiction / the absolute. Logic leads to not logic. And it's very much the same way. And so what it means is, like, in the test of universalizability, when I'm going through all the things that, like, oh, I realized I had a habit of interrupting people, which I really do, but I had a habit of interrupting people. That wasn't good. So that's a sin, and that I'm judging it out. I'm saying it's not in the image. I used to think it was good, but now I'm saying it's not good. I'm judging it out of the image of what I call good. And I see more and more of these things, and like, well, I wasn't stealing, which is good, and or like, I already saw that I stole, but I repented of that and I judged it out. I saw that what I once considered good is not good, and you're going up and up and up the list till it's more abstract things. And finally, the last thing it's almost like hell and judgment were cast into the lake. No, not hell and judgment. Death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. It's like the last enemy to be defeated is death. The last sin to be judged out of existence is judgment itself. And I know a lot of people wouldn't necessarily agree with me on this.
Yeah.
But what it means to see someone as good, or to love someone, is to see them as good / in the image. You're not judging them out of the image. That's what I mean by non-judgment. Judgment I reserve for a judging out, and a non-judgment is what in Siegel's book he called non-judgmental acceptance, i.e. love. And so if instead of saying there's something about you that's off, you're not in the image of the good, I'm accepting everything about you because I do see you as in the image of the good. And so there's a way that is the beatific vision. That's God's vision of you / your vision of God. And that is God's seeing of each one as first. God seeing everyone as his favorite or equally superlative, equally the best, which doesn't really make sense. But it wouldn't make sense either to say that God liked some people more than others, or that God in some way is equally indifferent to everyone or viewed everyone as equal. What really makes more sense, if one is following the paradoxical logic of the infinite, as much as one can, is it's to say that God likes everyone more than everyone else. Because whatever you're looking at is what you're looking at because you deemed it to be your highest good, like in this moment. But in the moment, there's no qualifier of in the moment. I'm looking at you right now and talking to you right now because right now, but again, within right now, there is no distinction between right now and not right now. This is the most important thing. And so it's the idea of the God whose gaze is infinite, is leading to the idea that he's seeing everyone in this way all the time, and he's being everyone in this way all the time, and understanding himself through our understanding of him.
And the way that's accomplished is by each person loving their neighbor.
It's people coming to see their neighbor as in the image of God.
Yeah.
And really, I would say even coming to see their neighbor as God, because there's no distinction that's eternal. The be versus be like distinction is going to get judged out along with judgment, so to speak. But it's also this, like, it's not that I see my neighbor as God in such a way that this is really complicated and paradoxical. But if I was
sorry, I was gonna say I do have to end off in literally like a minute or so.
Oh, okay, man, you're good, man. It's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing this with me.
No, thank you. You were extremely generous with your time. All I did was ramble. So thank you. I appreciate it. And then there was one. I'm going to respond to Phoebus' comments, and then I'm going to go. So I think I did connect it to Christ a little bit. But if you go to Wayne Fair's channel, you will see us talking about it more. Arguably, still not enough. Jordan, don't listen to me. Why do you care what I think about Christ? Listen to Jordan Daniel Wood. Jordan Daniel Wood he wrote The Whole Mystery of Christ, and that's the most interesting book on the incarnation that I've ever come across. Pretty much the most interesting of theology work of theology, bar none, that I've ever encountered. Then again, you're talking to someone who hasn't read many books. Now, if I come down here, seems like a really complicated way of saying the ground of being. Or did this conception give you something more? What I'm getting from this is it's like what I said. It's like, if there's a ground of being that was other and opposed to ordinary being, it's seeming to presuppose some still more ultimate ground of being, which all men speak of as the true ground of being. But in which case, where do they get off treating it as if it's so absolutely other and transcendent? If it's ultimately more immanent and more in the nature of the unity. But anyway, of that meta ground of being, I can say, yeah, it's meta as distinct from the not meta ground of being. In other words, I rotate the diagram. I had ordinary being, ground of being, and then and I understand there's a unity beneath now, and then I rotate the diagram. So now what I'm contrasting is like specificity with generosity. I'm contrasting the ground of being with the meta ground of being, which of course is presupposing a still more meta ground of being, and that all men would speak of as God. The point is, it's not really, at least as far as we're doing anything like logic, it's not a static target. And so to say, isn't that just the ground of being? Is like, what's just the ground of being? Like, isn't that just the last number of an infinite series? It's like, what's that number? You know what I'm saying? All right. So superb cow. Thank you. I like how you finished with your expanding your identity. Yeah, that's a really good book. Mindsight by Dan Siegel. And yeah, Phoebus, what I was going to say was, I feel like we've been long overdue for a conversation, and my door is always open. I believe that I gave you my number through Luke, and if I haven't, I can give it to you, or if you lost it, I can give it again, or if I didn't, I can give it to you. I want to, because you always interact with what I'm saying, but I'm really bad at multitasking, so in the moment, I'm generally not like interacting back. But yeah, no, okay, well, let me, okay, I'm wondering if I could, if I comment here I don't necessarily want to put it in the comment, but I will find you. Okay, I'm going to get your email and I'm going to send you my number, and we can talk properly sometime, because I don't like for people to be interacting with me and me not interacting back. And I can tell from what you're saying, you're extremely intelligent, and that you have a lot of critiques that in the moment I just don't even have enough time to properly unpack. So I think we're more than overdue for a conversation. So let me I'm taking this as permission to get your email from Luke. And then once he gives that to me, I'm going to email you my number, and you'll have my email address in the bargain, right? So that's what we will do. Thank you for your time, and God bless you. Okay, ending stream.